So in general, we're going to take these two steps to evaluate each and every argument. We're going to run each and every argument through two separate tests. The truth step, where we ask for each premise, is it true, is it false, or is it questionable? And notice we only ask that about the premises. We don't ask that about the conclusion. We don't ask whether the conclusion is true or not. We just check the premises. And then separately, we check the structure. And we ask, do we have enough information to figure out whether the conclusion is true or false? Or have the premises given us enough information to figure out the conclusion? So the word structure and the word support I'm going to use interchangeably throughout this class. So sometimes I'll use the word support, sometimes I'll use the word structure. They basically amount to the same thing. Now, an important thing to say right now is that these two steps are completely independent of each other. There's something we have to do to check the truth, and that's basically check the premises against reality, figure out whether the premises really are true or false, and then there's a completely separate check we have to do to see whether the argument has a good structure or has good support or not. And that involves a more abstract test where we have to kind of imagine what a world would look like if the premises were true and see if the information in those premises logically lead us to a conclusion in that imaginary world. All right, so let me just give you an example of how these are independent. Some arguments fail the truth test but pass the support test. That argument I just gave about my shoes being awesome because they're green and all green shoes are awesome fails the truth test. That first premise, they're green, is false, but it passes the support test. If those premises were true, we would be able to logically conclude from those premises alone that my shoes are awesome. So the information in the premises, even though that it's actually false information, is enough information for us to figure out the conclusion. It's a little bit weird, but we'll be talking more about this idea of structure. But notice just for now that whether a premise is true or false has nothing to do with whether the premises combined support the conclusion in this logical support way. And similarly, some arguments can fail the support test but pass the truth test. That other argument I just gave is an example of this. This is an example of an argument with all true premises, but those premises are completely irrelevant to the conclusion. Yes, my shoes are awesome. Yes, it's true my name is Sean, and it's also true that I live in New Jersey, but me living in New Jersey and my name being Sean has nothing to do with evidence supporting the conclusion that my shoes are awesome. By the way, I'm not sure my shoes are awesome. I just sort of glossed that over saying that that was true, but I don't know. That's probably more of an opinion than anything. Let's actually work through some examples now. We're going to run through 5 of them, and we're going to try to evaluate each and every argument. We'll ask for every argument. Overall, do we think this is a good or a bad argument? And more importantly, I want you to ask yourself, why do you think this argument's good or bad? And I'm hoping during this stage you pause each time to try to figure out for yourself before I provide you with the answer for this argument. So here's one argument. Jay Leno is famous. Premise 2, all famous people are men. Conclusion, Jay Leno is a man. There's a picture of Jay Leno. I happen to take a kind of scary looking picture from online of Jay Leno. I don't know what he's doing. He appears to be angry at someone. So ask yourself, is this a good or a bad argument? More importantly, ask why. If you think it's good, why do you think it's good? If you think it's bad, why do you think it's bad? This would be a time to pause to try to figure this out for yourself before you move on. Okay, this is a bad argument. The only reason this is bad is because premise 2 is false. This fails the truth test. It's not true that all famous people are men. There are lots and lots of famous people out there who are women. Let me just give you one example, Lady Gaga, and we'll move on. Notice just quickly, premise 1 is probably true. I'm guessing everyone in class has heard of Jay Leno. If you haven't, he's a late-night talk show host. And this argument has good structure. That's enough information in the premises to get us to that conclusion. But this is overall bad because we have a false premise in our argument. All right, let's move on to another argument. Premise 1, Dane Cook is a tool. Premise 2, all tools wear jeans. Conclusion, Dane Cook wears jeans. If you don't know who Dane Cook is, there are two pictures of him. He's a stand-up comic who's been in lots of movies lately, like Waiting, Good Luck Chuck, My Best Friend's Girl, I think. And I'm struggling to think of other movies, but he's been in a couple. Mr. Brooks, I believe. So ask yourself whether you think this is a good or a bad argument and why. Maybe before you figure this out, you might want to know what a tool is. Here's the definition of tool I have in mind. It's somebody who thinks they're hot stuff when they're not really that hot stuff. Maybe like a conceited person who thinks they're a little bit better than they really are. Usually tools have a little bit of something going for them, but not enough to justify their sort of arrogant, cocky opinion of themselves. This is a picture of a reality show on VH1 called The Tool Academy, where they take several tools, get them together in a house, and try to reform them out of their toolish ways. Lots of young people are using this hip new slang. I like to think of myself as still hipping with it, even though I'm not. Anyway, ask yourself about this argument. Is this a good or a bad argument? Have we offered good evidence in support of that conclusion? All right, I think this is a bad argument, and the reason why is because our premises fail the truth test. And I'm going to introduce something a little bit weird now. Premise one, I don't want to say it's downright false. Dane Cook is a tool. I think this is more questionable. This is more a matter of opinion. Who someone thinks is a tool or not a tool, it's going to vary from person to person. I don't know. Normally when I use this argument in class, I've gotten about half the people who think Dane Cook's a tool and half the people who think he's not a tool. He kind of straddles the line of tooldom. We don't like questionable premises in our arguments, though. They're not good evidence in support of a conclusion. And let me just expand a little bit on what I mean by a questionable premise. It's a premise that we don't label as obviously true or obviously false. There are a couple different examples of questionable premises. One that we just gave would be a premise that's merely an opinion, like cake tastes better than pie, Dane Cook's a tool, President Bush sucks. All of these would be examples of mere opinions where it's not obvious you could prove it one way or the other. It's just a matter of personal taste or preference. Another type of questionable premise, though, would be a claim that's not obvious one way or the other. So here's one example. There are exactly 4,816,155 hairs on my head. I don't know, that may be true, but I certainly haven't been bored enough to sit there and count all the hairs on my head to figure out whether that's true or false. If somebody offered that as a premise in an argument, I would just flag that as questionable, and I would ask, how do you know that? Could you tell me more? Provide more evidence to convince me that this premise is true before I just go and uncritically accept it as true. Others involve more complicated issues. Sociological issues are usually really complicated, questionable claims like the death penalty definitely deters would-be murderers from committing the crime of murder. If you institute the death penalty in a state, that will lower the incidence of murders in that state. Well, that's a really controversial claim. All sorts of studies that have been relatively inconclusive trying to figure out whether the death penalty significantly, statistically deters murders or not. So the main idea behind this is that we don't like questionable premises because they don't make for good evidence. Good evidence not only should be true, but should be obviously true. And if it's not obviously true, you should back it up or explain why it's true with other obvious claims. And